So it's good to see you all here today. We proposed this symposium for or panel discussion to talk about sheep. And the reason being is that several of us that work in the sort of farm technical assistance world keep seeing more and more sheep farmers. And they're just, if you look at the history of sheep in Vermont, or New England, there used to be a lot, and then there basically have been none for quite a long time, and the numbers are still small, but growing. So we definitely see more interest in it. Right now, or the last NASS census, I think the average sheep farm in Vermont had like 10 sheep. So there's still a lot of people with few, but there's more and more people that have a larger number. And we're focusing on this point for what I would call a mid-sized operation. And the mid-size being, I mean, Yash and I both will talk about having 80 to 100 HUs. And, this is an arbitrary distinction. People with a few animals, you could call it small. People with, our number, we call it middle. Some of you I know have many more than that. At some point, when you have a lot of animals, you're going to need to do things very differently than what we're doing. And that's a separate question we can talk about a little bit, but that's not really the focus. So what's nice about the mid-sized flock is that for several of us, we can have a job off the farm, and we also have a sheep operation. So it's kind of a different model than like our keynote speakers were talking about doing a lot of stuff. It's with ADUs, you're never going to get rich, not even close. So that's not really the point. The point is to be able to have the operation that achieves its aims, that pays for itself, and we have off-farm jobs. So if you don't like that model, don't tell me about it. All right, so for me, my name is Bruce Howlett. My partner Carol Dixon and I have Following Farm in East Montpelier. We have ADUs, they're crossbreds. They mostly British breeds, various kinds. They're intentionally mutts, which means things like National Sheep Improvement data isn't very useful, but we have managed to breed what we think are pretty vigorous, good sheep. Meat is our main product. We sell, or lambs, I should say. We sell lambs to other people to raise for slaughter quite frequently, probably a quarter of our number. We sell lambs for on-farm slaughter. That's become a growing piece of our business. And we also send lambs to inspect a slaughterhouse and cut up, and we sell entirely within the local community. So it's all direct to consumer. For me personally, I started out, I grew up on a dairy farm, so a lot of my thinking about sheep is actually kind of based on dairy, which is interesting because sheep people look at the world rather differently. And the systems are very different. I studied botany and ecology, so the agronomy stuff that I think about that we're not really talking about, that's sort of derived from that. And I've been doing technical assistance through the conservation districts, and I worked for NRCS for 7 years, and then back to the conservation districts. So I've seen a lot of other farms doing other things, some good and some bad. So the goal of our farm really, and this is, I think it's important, so I'm going to say it, it's to establish a low input grazing based farm that supports natural ecosystems while also providing food for the local human community. So the environment is important to us, local food is important to us, and because we have off-farm income, we're not primarily driven by making money off of it. Although the operation needs to pay for itself, we want that. We bought a totally derelict farm. Crap, I have pictures of it. See if that works.
I could just click next.
Anyway, bought a totally derelict farm, 35 acres open land, another 40 acres next The main part of the field had been a crop field, and then was planted to not much of a cover crop. It was eroding badly. And so we're trying to take this and turn it into a viable sheep farm. So we've come a long ways. This is what we call our upper barn. I'll be talking about that in a minute as to what we use it for. But there's still a lot of work to be done, but we're making progress. And so we're going to do things in a consistent order, just to thing. And so I'm going to start. We're going to talk about 4 different topics, and just going to rotate among us and see where it goes. So
I'm Josh Epic. My farm's over in Danville, Vermont. Started raising sheep 2010, really small scale, about 20 feeder lambs, dairy feeder lambs. And then in 2015, I had the opportunity to use a farm for free in Danville. A friend of mine bought it and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. You want to use it? I was like, yeah, I do. So I moved there. The house wasn't livable. It was a crazy situation. He built a barn for me. He had a tractor I could use. Like, I was really lucky. About 40 acres. And I grew from that to about 100 ewes. And then before that, I probably tried every small farming enterprise you could do. And then once I moved, I decided to focus purely on sheep. And then I pivoted to purely wholesale. I sold probably 9% of my lambs to 3 stores, weekly fresh lamb, whole animals. I bring to the slaughterhouse, another company picks them up. I have 0 inventory, and I get a check every week. And it's worked really well for me. I almost spend no time marketing, and makes it so I can have an off-farm job. Did I say I have Dorsets? No. Oh, I sort of, I have, they're a mix of Dorsets, but mostly Dorsets.
Old school Dorsets?
Polled Dorsets, no, I had some horned Dorsets and didn't like them. But I've described the way I raise the sheep as sort of low input lambing and high input finishing, and I'll go over that more later. But for the context of my market and my farm, it works so far.
I'm Bill Fosher. I started with sheep in December of 1990. I got 4 ewes, and in December of 2025, the last 4 ewes left my farm. So roughly a 35-year journey, and the curve in that was like, most of the time I had about 75 to 100 ewes. I ventured into vegetation management for a few years. During that time, I think we peaked at around 1,300 ewes. We were raising a couple thousand lambs a year. And then when that business ended, I went back to raising a few, went down to 50, up to 75, up to 100, down to 50 again, kind of bounced around in that neck of the woods. I had an outbreak, not really an outbreak, but a long simmering problem of O-line progressive pneumonia in my flock, and I destocked completely and just went to buying feeder lambs for a couple of years, and then got back into the breeding operation. Let's see, when was that? 2010-ish, and then I finally figured out kind of what I wanted to do when I grew up with my sheep habit. After 25 years at it, and I started with a crossbred flock of Dorset and North Country Cheviot. So first cross ewes, and then I took those ewes and bred them to Texel rams. And that was working actually pretty well, I think. But unfortunately, I had an injury. I had to sell all my sheep very, very suddenly. And while I was thinking about possibly getting back into it, the people that owned the land I'd been using, one of them died, and the other one decided he was going to move on and probably put the farm up for sale. So I've decided to, at least for now, put things on hold. I might or might not eventually get back into sheep breeding. I hope to have something to do with sheep continuously. I miss having them around. See what else I need to touch on here. So my operation has always been low input, low output, and low capital. I own about 3.5 acres of land. I've never owned more than that. I've always leased land, usually on a handshake, and never for cash. So I've, really kind of just been at the mercy of landowners, and they've been kind of at my mercy as well. So it's worked out pretty well. Sounds like I'm out of time, but I covered the vegetation management, field maintenance is what they got out of the deal, and I got.
Did they put permanent fence up?
No. No, all my infrastructure is portable.
How do you get water out to these spots?
With a truck and trailer. We'll get to that in the grazing section.
We're gonna cover that right now. So next, so our grazing system, so we're gonna talk about grazing systems now, what we use. Our grazing system is totally portable, no permanent infrastructure, no permanent fence, no permanent water. And so that's basically it, ready to go in the truck and get moved. Solar energizers, big innovation. Self-grounding nets, if you're not familiar with those, really big help. And the one laid out is just I'm fixing it, which is not always a good idea. Anyway, not a big deal. It turns out sheep don't drink that much water, so you don't eat a lot. Usually we'll end up, this is enough for our main group. There's like 8 or 10 fences there. Usually our standard paddocks for our entire group would be 4 to sometimes 6, as many 6 fences, but usually it's four fences worth. So pretty straightforward and totally portable and movable to other places. Our original plan was to basically graze our home farm and cut hay from other farms and bring it in. We make much of our own hay, and whether it's good or deer or not, don't talk to me about. That's a complicated question. And so it turned out that it was two things. First of all, it's much easier to find grazing land than good hay land, and it was some of the hay fields we were using were not very productive, and our home farm hay fields were a lot better. So we ended up switching to doing mostly haying at home and grazing elsewhere. So our basic system, we graze across our entire property really fast at the beginning of the season, covered like twice the normal size paddocks. And then that takes about 2 weeks. And when we're done, we load them in a trailer, haul them all off to somewhere else. And then they're there. The place that we've been using recently is about 25 acres. It's pretty productive. So we're there for 4 to 6 weeks. Then they go somewhere else, maybe a different farm, maybe back home. So next.
Every day.
Yeah, and we move them every day. So really one of the big challenges in our planning is, so grazing is simple. We've done this for 15 years and we have a system we like. But trying to figure out which fields to hay, which fields to graze, and what time is often the biggest challenge that we have. And it's based on productivity, quality, accessibility, and it gets complicated. And it's never what you think it's going to be at the beginning of the year. Yep. So that's the key thing that is, and this is a big challenge if you're trying to do haying. It's complicated. Go to the next one, please. The other thing to note relating to, because we have the equipment and because we're actually grazing fairly lightly, mostly, and we get behind, I often clip. So clipping our pastures is a key management tool that we use. And the disc mower that's parked in the background there is the machine I most like to do that with. So this is a big piece of our strategy to improve the quality, basically, of the quality of the grass that's available to sheep.
So, like grazing manager is actually pretty similar to Bruce. Mostly using just flexing and hauling water. But I want to talk a little bit about, so backtrack a little bit. I got to about 30 Katahdin ewes before I got Dorsets. And then I had the opportunity to buy 70 Dorset ewes from a farmer pretty close by. And with that, I got the stores that I sell, the markets that I sell to today. And at that point, when I jumped from 30 to 70 ewes, I realized I started to need to change some of my management. Some of the ways I was doing things weren't going to work anymore. And one of those was I've always trucked my sheep all over the place, sort of grazing any field that I could get a hold of. And when you suddenly have 100 ewes, you can't necessarily go truck your ewes to 5 acres because they're not going to be there very long. So I had to really start thinking about what size fields were going to be worth it. I really want those sheep to be at one location, ideally at least 2 weeks, and that's not even that very long. I have a 16-foot trailer, but I hire someone to truck my sheep when I'm moving the whole herd. So it's expensive. It's depending where I'm going, $300 to $500 just in trucking fees, not my labor. So I started being more picky about the fields I would take. And another challenge with trucking all over is once you get to that location, you're gonna want to finish all those fields, even if the grass back home is actually ready to graze. So before you know it, I'm spending most of my year grazing really mature tall grass, and I haven't really figured out how to make that better. A lot of the land I use is not really hayable. Something I still struggle with today. Although I do probably less trucking than I used to. And I try to do a lot more walking of my flock to fields rather than trucking. I'll go into that more later. And then one new thing I started last year, there's a woman probably about 20 minutes away that started contract grazing my sheep. I use once they get dry for about a month. She takes them and grazes them for me, and it's like going on vacation. Like it's really great. It's like September, October. I'm pretty sick of moving fence. I want a break, and I don't even like. It's probably cheaper to keep them home and feed hay, but the break is worth it. Yeah, so I think we're going to talk about lambing later, right? Yeah, I'll go into that more.
So this is my my grazing system. I like these guys. I use all Electronet, and I came up with what I felt like was a pretty good labor saving trick, which you can kind of see here, which is that I would run a long strip of Electronet, and then I would slice off a little skinny paddock for them every day. And you can kind of see here where the sheep are. Yesterday they were to the right, and tomorrow they'll go to the left. And this is like I fenced off what I figured was a day's worth of feed in that paddock. One of the things that I liked about this system is that I could vary it. So here's more sheep, a bigger group of sheep on lower quality feed? And the answer there was to give them a much bigger paddock, because they needed more of that lower quality grass to go for a day, partly because there were more of them and partly because it was lower quality. And in this scenario, they came down the right-hand side of that hill, and they're working their way back up the left-hand side. It's out of the frame, but there's a trailer with a sap tank of water sitting up at the top of that hill, and a series of way too many garden hoses coming down, but it's all gravity fed. So that worked out pretty nice. One of the things that in the part of the world I've been farming in all my life, we don't lack hills, so we can usually find a high spot to stick a tank of water. So I don't have to move water I move the watering point every day when I move the sheep, but I don't have to move the water supply every day. Unless a porcupine chews through the garden hose and drains the whole tank, which happens more than you would think it might. Moving animals from field to field is an issue. It's tough. It's expensive. And what I usually ended up doing was finding places where there were a number of fields in a general area. And usually I was able to find fields that I could walk the sheep between. Very early on in this process, I figured out that whether I was the one that was doing the trucking or whether I was hiring trucking done, it wasn't an effective use of time or money. Particularly, I mean, if I had a big field to get to or a big complex of fields, then maybe. But, you know, in southwestern New Hampshire where I'm located, we tend to have a lot of very small scattered fields that have been, you know, sort of broken up over the years. Using this system, I've been able to extend my grazing season pretty effectively and graze stockpile, usually until Christmas time. When I was in Western Mass briefly with the vegetation management business, I was usually able to get it to early January. And that would sort of depend on you know, what the consistency of the snow was. Like if you get wet, sloppy snow the first week of December and then it freezes solid, the sheep can't get through that. I heard somebody, I don't remember who it was, but talking about draft horses going out and smashing up the ice and then the sheep following the draft horses around. That seems like a pretty cool idea. But I never had draft horses. I never had cattle in the winter, so it was not something I was ever able to try. We'll be on over 3 minutes, haven't I? That's about it.
Are you guys measuring weight gains at all? Like how do you, yeah.
So my weight gains on, so I usually have 2 sets of lambs. I will get into lambing, but I lambed on pasture in May. Those lambs would gain like crazy until they were off their mothers, right? Like you'd expect. The lambs got fatter, the ewes got skinnier. The feeder lambs that I bought in May were usually around 55 to 65 pounds, and I could get them to gain, the whole group as an average was usually about 0.4 pounds a day on grass.
0.3 to 0.5 seems to be the range.
How many acres are you guys pasturing in total, that each of you, if you have 100 sheep?
I don't know, it varies from year to year, but something on the order of 70.
Yeah, I was probably like 45 to 50 for 100 sheep.
And you
And it's
knew-
not 100, we had 100 ewes in
Right.
the land.
Right, 100 ewes.
100 ewes.
I think I graze about 150 acres, but I have very low stocking rate.
And where do you presume, to do your weighing, you bring them home and do 30, 60, every time you bring them back, you
Tell me about that.
We're gonna talk about that.
Okay, fine.
Guys get ahead of us.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about, next wintering systems. And you'll see that I'm gonna talk about something very different than, these two guys are. We do bale feed on pasture, but only for typically maybe 4 weeks, and it varies from year to year. Our farm is generally wet. There's only a few places that actually you can do this successfully. And we also have a consistent, heavy snow that makes dealing with the sheep difficult. The sheep can manage it, but bottom line is we don't like keeping them out on pasture. It's way too much work for us. And it's hard on the land. So we keep our sheep in the area in the farmstead. This is an area that it's basically on the foundation of an old barn. It has gravel or concrete or wood chips underneath, and we surround it with panels that are sort of livestock panels and T-posts, and there's something like 50 square feet per ewe in here. So this is our ewe group in the wintertime. We feed round bales in the Premier big bale feeders, which I like the first generation of them. This generation, I'm not so happy about, and I'm not convinced that they're that much better than just buying a $20, $30 Tractor Supply fence panel. They do have some advantages. They last longer than fence panels, but they cost vastly more. So they work for us, and we usually keep at least usually 3 to 4 for ADUs out, so available to the sheep at any given time. This building with a funny little prow here is what is a part of the old barn. That's the only part that's still standing. There's a space inside that the sheep have access to, and it has the water, which it has power, so we can plug the water in very easily. And we also build our lambing pens, the jugs in there, and we'll talk about that in a bit. This is what it looks like at the end of the season. In this particular year, we're only using this area down the bottom. We just didn't need it, so we didn't use it. So that you see the hay pack builds up pretty good. And later in the season. So one of the important things about this, if you do this, you will be managing manure. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. This is both a positive and a negative. The positive is that I have all this manure to spread it on the fields to improve the fertility. It makes an enormous difference. Enormous. So that's good. The bad, of course, is that it's work. It's a lot of work. And it doesn't always get done on time because I don't always have the time to do it. So that's a challenge. At some point, we're in the process because one of the problems with this too is it tends to get runoff in the spring, particularly in the summer. Not so much in the winter when everything's frozen solid. But in the summer, it picks up water, picks up water, picks up water. If you get a big rainstorm, it runs off, pollutes. State doesn't like that, and we are in the process of putting a roof over this, courtesy of various state grants. So we'll basically get most of the cost paid for. It should have been done 3 months ago. They're going to start putting the roof up on Monday, hopefully before lambing starts.
Do you have a stacking site as well? For your,
We do.
but it's not there, it's somewhere else.
The stacking site is not easily accessible in the winter, so we use it only erratically in the winter. And we do not take, one of the things, I'm not going to go big into manure management, but what I do is different than a lot of people. This stuff, I tear the pack apart with a backhoe, load it in the spreader, and go straight to the field. No composting, no piling, straight to the field.
We'll talk about that.
So I only have I think it's like a 30 by 70 superstructure, and that's not big enough to get all my sheep inside. So the majority of my sheep are bale grazed that winter, all winter long. I use that barn to finish, so I always have about roughly around 50 lambs in the barn that I'm finishing with. I finish with hay and whole corn. And because of my markets, I'm pulling 3 to 4 lambs every week. So I don't want to go out in the field to grab them. So I need to be able to weigh them every week and grab grab them easily, so that's a big part why they're there. But the rest of them are all outside, bale grazing like this. The other reason I do this is, I don't think I mentioned before, but when I moved to Danville, that farm had been sitting for 10 years. The soil fertility was very low. It's also a very sandy farm, including an old sand pit. And I didn't have money to go buy fertilizer, lime, wood ash, and this was the easiest way for me to increase production. Because it's sandy soil, I've had amazing results from going from grass that's barely can keep a sheep alive to like lush green grass that's probably tripled in yield. And in the lamb group, they're weaned by then, and they're also getting corn. I drive all the bales out with the tractor. I don't love it. I wish there was a way to pre-stack everything out in the field, but I haven't figured that out. And I think you want to change the photos?
Quick question. So those sheep have no inside cover at all?
No. I try to find areas that can get some windbreak. That can be like a row of trees. Sometimes that's a hill in the right spot. I've used last year, it got really windy and I plowed snow up to make a windbreak.
And your animal welfare law doesn't, they don't climb up the butt. So we got it changed for like island sheep that are.
Well, I don't think we don't really have any laws around that.
Oh, we do. We have to have certain
The-
amounts,
the-
but I won't.
The issues if you are on a road is people are driving by and they call it the state cops or game warding. My farm, you can't see from the road anywhere. So
Can I just quickly ask what sort of hay you guys are feeding from,
I buy-
change it closer to land?
So, except for this year, because of the drought, I always buy second or third cut,
Wrapped or dry?
wrapped,
Yep.
baleage most of the time. Sometimes this year it's actually pretty dry. I try to get it on the drier side, but the farmers don't always listen, or it doesn't always come that way. And I test all my hay and often work with a nutritionalist that will tell me which hay is best for finishing, which hay is best for dry use, early gestation, late gestation. When I use the lamb in a barn, what for lactation. So I try to match those because some hay where the use is more the calcium and phosphorus ratios. So some hay is a lot better for that, and some other hay is better for finishing. And then the outside lambs I feed about a pound of whole corn, and then I try to bring that up to about 2 pounds of whole corn per lamb when they go in the barn. They're closer to going to slaughter.
Did you say outside lambs?
Yeah, they're getting about a pound of corn with hay.
So the lambs are outside for a portion of the winter.
So the ones that I'm finished, like the ones that are closest, the biggest ones that are closest to slaughter are in the barn. The rest of them are outside.
In a separate flock.
Yes.
And you're putting corn in troughs or on the ground?
I just use cut like sewage pipe. I have put on the ground too when I had to, but definitely more waste.
1 pound a head outside, 2 pounds per head per day.
Yep.
Are you guys doing anything with predator control? In your pictures of the pasture, there weren't any livestock guards, dogs, or llamas or anything?
There were in mine.
So a few things about predator control. I do have dogs. Only one of them's really that great of a livestock guardian dog. The other two aren't great with sheep. I have had 0 coyote problems on the home farm. I know there's tons of them. If you go in my woods, you'll see like scary amount of tracks. I think a big reason is the first year I was on that farm, a coyote got shocked by the fence. And I don't let people hunt coyotes on my farm. I can't control my neighbors, but all the time people ask me, hey, can I come shoot coyotes? And no, you can shoot all the deer you want, but not coyotes. And I think that's made a big difference. I think the coyotes have basically learned to leave my sheep alone. I've seen them jump into the sheep pen and walk through the sheep pen with sheep in them, hop out and didn't touch my sheep. And right now, like that flexing net, there's probably that much showing. Like it's not doing anything. So that's my only explanation of why the coyotes aren't killing them.
So I can be pretty quick about wintering. It was a nightmare. I never got a good wintering system down. When I was in Western Mass with the vegetation management, the big flock, we had half of the flock in a barn and half outside, because that was how much barn space we had. We had a 110 by 220 barn. We could get about 450 to 500 ewes into it. When I didn't have that available, they were, you're seeing my winter housing right there. And there were some advantages to this, right? This happened to be a degraded crop field, and it was really happy to get all of those nutrients from all that hay and all that manure, and that there were a lot of advantages to that. But it was incredibly labor intensive, and my ewes did fine, but basically the lambs, if I had any lambs that I was still trying to grow at this stage, it was a holding pattern at best. Some of them would actually lose weight over the winter, and then when the grass came on in the spring, there'd be a big flush of compensatory gain, and I think I was God. Oh my God, they're gaining 1.5 pounds a day, but then that would stop very quickly once they were basically back to their normal plan of nutrition. This is why I spent so much effort trying to get my grazing season extended as far as I could, because every day that I didn't have to fire up a tractor and unwrap a round bale and drag it to the field and either unroll it or set it into a feeder, I did both. That was, to me, those were good days. And the other big challenge that I had, that folks have touched on here, is that just finding good quality hay is a problem. I don't know about Yasha, but Bruce, you were mentioning you made some of your own hay, and I did early in my career. I made hay, and I sold all my haying equipment like in 1995 or so, and I always say I've probably made 3 million wrong decisions in farming, but selling my hay equipment, I'm pretty sure was right, and it's the only one I'm really confident was right. Just at the scale that I was operating, it didn't make sense to own all of that iron. So that's kind of my wintering thoughts.
All right. We have
Standing in the water.
Yeah.
So we're running like heated,
No, you're
No,
comfortable.
they're eating snow. They're on baleage. They're on baleage. So the question was about water. I'm sorry, we haven't been very good about repeating the questions for the folks online, but the question was what are they doing for water? And the answer is that they're eating snow and they're eating baleage, which is like 50% water.
All right, we have 2 more topics to cover, handling systems and lambing. So let's try to get through them on schedule. So any of you who've tried to do operations on sheep and pasture knows that it's a giant pain in the rear, if it's even possible. You can't put sheep against net fence. You need something solid. So sometimes you can sneak up on one of them if they're really friendly, or use stealth, and you need to be quick. Grain helps. You can throw some grain down, and as they're scrounging for that. But basically, handling happens in a built system because it's really the only way it works. So we have two different things that we do generally. This is our upper barn. I showed a picture of the back side of it. This is the front side of it. And our rams are in here. I'm not sure what we're doing with them, but space is nice because as a nice post and beam barn, those posts are great sort of anchors for fences. And so we can subdivide it various ways. There's an end bay that you can't see here. That's a separate space with a sliding door. And if you go left from here, there's a smaller pen there that's already constructed. It's always there. And then a nice latching gate. And so for shearing, we can keep the main group in here, push a few into the other pen so that they're nice and tight. And then the shearers have a good space and they have a sheep right handy for them. And Colin and other shearers can talk about what it really takes, but it took us a while to build this system. And the system, it's not so much built, but just how you use it. This is also good. We do a lot of this building, we usually keep our lambs in, or the yearling lambs in them as we're finishing them. So we have a scale here. We can run them through the system and weigh them. That really helps if we have to treat feed or whatever. So this system is where we do most of our lamb groups. Outside, so if in the winter, it's a little different story. Sonia and I are hoof treating here. Sonia, my niece, and so if you the wintering area doesn't have a good corral or good chute, I would really like to have one. We just have not had the space. When we get the roof built, we're probably going to add something. So we have to construct something in here, usually using whatever's available. Outside, when we're moving around in the fields, we build these corrals out of T-posts and lots of fences. So this is the last group we're catching them up to move them off of this farm onto a different site. The secret to building this kind of stuff is decreasing size of pens. So you build a giant pen, put them in it, and then you make it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until they're nice and tight. And so you have to have a system to be able to do that. You cannot crowd the sheep into a small pen where they'll be tight. They won't do it. You have to, so it takes a lot of hands. But it's also not complicated. We are definitely the masters of using Tractor Supply livestock panels to manage our sheep. We have done this for weighing. We treat for parasites. We use something like this to catch them all. So it's not complicated. It's time consuming. This operation takes 3 days. It takes a day to set up the corral and system, a day to move, and another day to take down again. So not easy. Porta yards would be nice. They're kind of expensive. I haven't wanted to spend that kind of money.
So for handling, I spent years thinking I needed the fancy Prattley system that was on a mobile trailer. So I had nothing for years and just cobbled together some stupid system. And then someone pointed out to me, you can buy a DNS system for a lot cheaper. I'm like, oh, so I ended up buying that system. I think it was like $3,000 instead of $20,000 or $30,000. And it just was like an aha moment of like, don't always chase the shiny thing. Like there's sometimes cheaper ways to get started that will make your life so much easier, even though you maybe really want the fancy shoe on the trailer. And now I use that for loading. I have the deworm. Basically, if I have to touch the sheep at all. I think one big thing that I have to keep thinking about as I got to about 100 years is every time I have to touch those sheep, it's a lot of labor. It's basically an all-day job. And I want to manage in a way that I have to touch them as little as possible, deworm as little as possible. And I slowly have been deworming less and less. That's basically how I shear. That's the catch pen. The shear motor is hanging off the tractor. I'm not sure it's the greatest system, but it works. And she keeps coming back every year, so. Oh, border collies. I wouldn't have sheep without border collies. It took the painful times when sheep get out and made them fun. It became a challenge with the dogs, where normally I would be like screaming about what am I gonna do? It makes moving the sheep way easier. I can walk mile, 2 miles down the road through the woods with the border collies. Here I'm using them to hold them back as I'm feeding hay, so they're not running underneath my tractor. Before that, I dropped a bale on the sheep once. Didn't kill it, just broke the horn off. But like feeding grain without border collies is just chaos. There's so many uses for them, even though they're pretty expensive and they can drive me nuts. Like I can't imagine having sheep without them. And yeah.
Did you purchase them trained?
So the first one I had, I got as a puppy. The second one I bought started, although he hadn't done anything in the year and really didn't have any. He was barely started. He was nuts. That one, the closest one there, I just got in August. He was 1 year old and started. He was out of Montana, and he's like, I'm really impressed. I got him started dog because I basically was like, I need a dog in the next year that can actually work. I would kind of like to start a puppy, but it takes a lot more planning.
Do you let them in your house?
Yes, they live in my house.
Yeah.
Which, that's my wife right now. They're driving her crazy.
When you say expensive, how expensive?
So he was $4,000, including travel.
Okay, so without travel?
I think it was like 35 or 32.
Okay.
I never met the trainer or the dog, but talking on the phone, I liked her philosophy and training, and it was definitely. He was very shut down when I got. It took a week for him to get to me, and I thought he didn't even know how to herd sheep because he was just so shut down. It took like basically 2 to 3 months for him to remember how to herd. Takes a lot of patience when you get a started dog.
Okay, I'm gonna make the case for the $20,000 portable handling system. This is an alligator portable handling system that we imported when I was doing the vegetation management business. I never would have bought it if we hadn't been doing the vegetation management business, but we absolutely had to have it. I mean, so the big difference between this and the other systems is that I can roll up on a scene, I can have this deployed and animals in it within an hour. I can do what I need to do and then pack it up and be gone in another hour. So like if you're in a situation where labor matters, then these are pretty darn handy. I have a friend who was kind of looking at the same scenario, and he decided that he would make the trade-off and get a bunch of the DS panels and a snowmobile trailer and build a little rack to put them on. And for, I don't know, 5,000–6,000, you got a pretty functional system. It takes them a little bit longer to set it up and break it down, but it works fine. Anyway, so my main thing when I'm looking at handling systems is throughput. And with this system, I can deworm about 200 animals an hour. I can really crank them through there. You'll notice that in there with them, I'm not reaching over to try to get their head out of the bottom of a single file race. I've got, with that size animal, I probably had 20 of them in that race. And I just start at the front, and when I've wormed one, I push it ahead of me and I step back. And so if it's in front of me, it's been wormed, and if it's behind me, it hasn't. I'm not marking everyone. It's a very efficient system. I got another picture. And then this, the dog, again, spend the money on the dog. With this, with a good dog, you can, and some practice, you can catch single sheep in the field. And it's, it just makes everything, like Yasha was saying, takes the things that are like a total crisis without a dog, it makes them into, at worst an annoyance and at best a fun time. And it opens up just all kinds of possibilities. Like I would never have been able to graze a lot of the fields that I've grazed in my life without being able to walk sheep there. And walking sheep basically requires dogs. So, yeah.
Were any of you guys using RFID tags?
The question was whether we're using RFID tags. I'm not, Bruce is not.
For fencing or for what? For
Your tags.
for just, yeah,
I don't know if she's here today. One of my colleagues at AFT does have RFID tags in all of her sheep.
I do, and I'm happy with that.
That handling system that I showed you, I also had a scale, a DS livestock scale that I could put in line with that. So that was how I handled my, I tried to weigh at least, all the lambs got weighed at least once a month, usually a little bit more often than that.
Can I ask a quick question about the dogs? But shout me down if you don't have time, you don't want to address it, but you all mentioned having off-farm jobs, and that's what I can't get my head around is how I manage a border collie and be gone 8 hours a day as well. How's that work for you?
I work remotely.
Oh, okay.
The question was about how border collies and a full-time off-farm job coincide.
They definitely need work, but I think they need less work than maybe some people think. Because I see people with like 20 or 30 ewes that life could be a lot easier with a border collie. They don't think they have enough work for them. You probably do. And I work some at home, some in the office, and some on the road. And as long as they get that few hours of being out at short time work, the winter is really the hard part. There's just not that much to do.
Yep.
Like when I'm moving a fence, they can at least run around while I'm moving a fence. In winter, basically, they get to hold the flock back while I feed grain. That's it. That's pretty boring. It's not actually exercise, it's mental stimulus that they need. So if I go for a walk, that's not enough. Like run them for hours and they wouldn't be tired. But it's the mental stimulus of herding that actually tires them, and they need that, especially when they're young.
And I would also add that in terms of buying a dog, you can spend anywhere from $800, which is what I've spent to buy a pup out of Canada, to many, many thousands of dollars. And what's most important is, finding a good breeder and finding good genetics. Because, it's important that the dog be able to work the sheep. It's also important that the dog have an off switch, so that if you are working on farm, the dog has done the work that it needs to do and has been mentally stimulated and is content to hang out for the day in your house if that's the way you keep them, or in its kennel, chewing on a bone or whatever, and not getting frantic. So, making sure that you're buying from a good, reputable breeder who breeds dogs for working traits, not for how they look.
I will say real quick, if you have young kids, you do have to be careful with border collies. A lot of them are not good with young kids. I have a 2-year-old son. I just lucked out with that dog, Montana, or the breeder was really good at picking the dog, and he's amazing with them. But other border collies, they can be really sketchy around kids.
I just have a quick question on your handling systems. Does anyone have a tilt table and you find it useful?
No,
No,
no tilt. You asked whether we have anyone have a tilt tip. No, I handle the sheep manually for hoof trimming. So last topic is arguably the most important because we're going to be running short, so we're going to have to make this quick. So We, unlike these guys, are lamb in winter, and we lamb, it's not too crazy for us because we have the barnyard, they're in a confined area, we have a building next door, so basically, we go out in the morning, look for lambs, if there's new lambs, then bring them into the barn. So none of this staying up all night, so, the cold isn't really a problem with lambing, and we lamb in March. The idea being that basically the lambs are around 2 months old when they hit pasture, which is, they're plenty big enough to really eat a lot of grass. So that's, if you pay attention to them, lambs start nibbling on hay right out, or grass if they're outside as soon as they're born, but they don't really eat a lot, and they just nibble on it. But their consumption really starts to go up dramatically, and the hay consumption goes up dramatically, or the grass comes at about 2 months. So we want them to be out on pasture at that point. So in their peak growth time, they're out on the best grass. So the timing is really about minimizing, for us, minimizing hay feeding. It also means that they're market size, 100 pounds. We're all grass fed, grass finished, and we're dealing with whatever grass we have. That takes a while to get to market size. And so generally speaking, they're reaching market size in early to mid-winter, which is actually when our slaughter dates are usually available. So, so timing of lambing is related to things outside of your control, like when you have slaughter dates and when your markets are. So we usually have some available for the holidays in March and April, which is great. One of the keys, the innovations that made our life simple, it's a lot of work when you have a lot of sheep, but for 100 you can manage it, is we bring them in, we put them in lambing jugs, so we can line up about 6 of them in our barn here. They're just made out of hog panels. The feeder, you see the black one on the left, there's a feeder hung on the wall that is just bought from the local farm store. That works great. It's really, that saved a lot when we finally did that. I just basically just cut these panels. There's a 6-foot piece and a 4-foot piece, so they're 24 square feet. It's slightly narrower than optimal, but it works. 25 square feet is sort of the norm. And we keep them in here for about 2 or 3 days. Then we'll weigh the lambs and ear tag them and send them back out.
I used to lamb in a barn in April, and then when I got the Dorset flock, I did that for 1 year, and the barn was way too crowded. So I started lambing on pasture, and for a number of years I kept lambing in the barn and on pasture. Now it's one flock. I lamb in pasture. I go on and on about the benefits and how great it's been for me to transition to pasture raising. I don't know if I have time for that. But I will say a couple of really important things to think about if you want to lamb on pasture. One is I want about 2 weeks of grazing before I lamb to give the ewes time for the rumens to adjust. I don't want to lamb right away. The other is I want about 40 days of continuous grazing during lambing. You can't move them across the farm or to a new field in the middle of lambing, or even a few weeks after lambing when they're really young. I tried that once and it didn't work. But I'm happy to talk more about it afterwards if people have questions.
So you start around end of May?
So for me, that's beginning of June, like June 5th.
I also land on pasture. And to me, the most important thing is this is what you want to see when you show up in the field in the morning. This is a ewe that lambed, or this is her first lamb. And you know, she just gets it. She understands the assignment, as the kids would say. And so that getting to that point with sheep that are, like most of us, if you're going to start with new sheep, you're probably going to be getting sheep that have been handled in a barn, that have been lambed and put into jugs. And some of them are going to fall out of a pasture lambing system, no question about it. But you know, one of the beauty things of sheep is that they replace themselves pretty rapidly. So if you start looking for ewes like this and keeping their ewe lambs back, before long, this is just gonna be what you expect. And when something other than that happens, you'll be like, what is wrong with this? You know, this crazy ewe. The other thing is that, I don't know if you can see in there, but there's a dog holding that ewe while I tail, castrate and ear tag that lamb. Having a dog that's capable of helping you lamb on pasture is like, it's amazing. And this guy he was the best that I had. And what he let me do was basically have a kind of a high input lambing system. I didn't use any jugs, but I was able to, you know, like immediately record and tag and weigh and administer BOCI to all of my lambs within 24 hours of birth. And that's hard to do on pasture without a dog like that. The other thing that I selected heavily for was lambing on the first breeding cycle, so that lambing was not drawn out. And I started on usually around the 1st of May. Anything that was born after about the 20th of May I didn't consider a candidate as a replacement animal. So they were, you know, very heavily selected for early breeding.
Are you using teasers at all?
Not in this system. I did when I was trying to lamb in January in the vegetation management operation.
And did you also do cedars and frosted lamb?
Sorry?
Cedars and frosted lamb, you didn't do any of that?
No, I never used artificial hormones. I'm sorry, again, the first question was about using teaser lambs. I did use teaser lambs for the winter lambing groups that I did back in the day, but never for this. It wasn't necessary. And as far as like the hormonal treatments to synchronize lambing, I never did that. Yep.
What was your lambing mortality percentages?
Well, I think I had a train wreck one year where it maybe was 15%. We had a really cold, really long rainstorm on Mother's Day. I forget what year it was, but Mother's Day weekend. And it was just, you know, that was a disaster. I couldn't get enough. I bought tarps. I did all like tried to make myself an emergency barn, and I just had chilled lambs all over the place.
Was that the Mother's Day floods
Yeah,
10 years ago?
yeah. It was more than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Can we hear about mortality for the producers?
So the questions about mortality rate, arts, it varies from year to year, depends on the genetics and the environment, but it's generally under 10%. Actually, this last year was much less. And the thing about lamb mortality is you always get some fraction that are born dead, and you don't really know what's going on with that. And whether or not you include those or not really changes your mortality rate. That was probably 2/3 of our lamb mortalities this year were born dead, and it wasn't a very large number, but.
Yeah, I just say my normal is probably around the same, 5 to 10%.
I don't know the actual percent, but I know the mortality, the first weeks of lambing definitely went down with pasture lambing. This year was very low. I think I lost like 1 or 2 lambs from lambing to the fall. I actually lost more ewes than lambs this year. But I think because of the dry weather, helped a lot of the help.
Do you not bother to intervene and pull lamb?
You can't most of the time. You're either gonna be there too late, and if you're hovering around all the time, try to be there when they're lambing, you're gonna mess it all up. If you're someone that wants to be hands-on and can't live with the fact if you go out there, there's a dead lamb you couldn't save, pasture lamb is not for you. It's like, there's a, you have to be somewhat hands off.
Yeah, so the question is about intervention lambing on pasture. Josh is right, it's really hard to do. Even, I probably intervene more than we might, but one of the tricks to learning sheep is learning when it's actually important to intervene and when it isn't. And a lot of people start out thinking that there are problems when patients would solve them. Not always. And the trick is to understand the difference and know when when intervention actually will have a positive outcome. The other thing is to genetics, breed, and good feed. If the animals are in good condition and that you have good, and they're big enough, we reduced our lambing problems dramatically by reducing which of the yearlings got bred. And we had a size threshold that almost eliminated lambing problems. It's like, okay, if they're not big enough, they're not getting bred. And that no problems almost basically went away.
And I would say, I mean, my lambing fields were 4 miles from home, for the most part, in the latter part of this, experience. So, intervening was, if there was a chance to intervene and I could see that it was necessary, I would. But usually I wasn't there when it was happening.
You know what your landing rates were you like, how many lambs were you dropping from you?
That was another thing I wanted to touch on. The question was about, basically about fertility, how many lambs per ewe. And to me, in a pasture system, anything more than 2 lambs is a problem. So triplets are a problem. Quads are basically impossible. I mean, they happen, but like the ewe is not going to be able to raise one of those in a grass-fed system in all likelihood. So I was looking for an overall fertility rate no higher than about 180.
Same, I'm about 1.7, but definitely 1.7 in the adult ewes. The ewe lambs is a totally different story.
And that's after mortality.
For me, it was.
Not after.
Yeah, 700.
That's like live lambs born.
Okay, we are past the end of the session, and unsurprisingly, a lot of questions since we don't want to get in the way of the farmer panel is coming up. So
So that's a lesson learned. We need more sheep stuff next year.